In the last years of the 19th century, the public looked to the skies in excited anticipation of powered flight. The dream of manned flight had teased humanity for centuries, and now it seemed the dream was on the cusp of becoming a reality. And so when the good people of California, of Nebraska, of Wisconsin and Kansas, Iowa and Illinois gazed up into the night sky and saw a mysterious airship, there was amazement. Yet this phantom airship vanished into history, and we still don't know who was behind it. What happened in the skies over the United States in 1896 and 1897? What is the truth behind the phantom airship seen by 100,000 people? Whilst researching the albatross of Jules Verne, I became intrigued by a particular rabbit hole. I promptly fell into said rabbit hole and learnt of the 1896 to 1897 phantom airship enigma. Some 100,000 witnesses are said to have seen a mysterious airship in the skies over the United States during the autumn of 1896 and the late winter early spring of 1897. But what were they really seeing? In this video, we will trace the phantom airship's course across America and ponder over 3 theories that might, or might not, explain this mystery. As with most things strange, this story started in California, in the skies above Sacramento, Oakland, and San Francisco. In November of 1896, according to the San Francisco Call, a horse trainer called David Carl saw a mysterious airship. It was close enough to the ground, he said, that he could distinctly hear someone say, "We are too low down here. Send her up higher." The news spread, and soon many more people were reporting a strange light in the sky. This light would circle and rise and fall in a manner very unlike that of a star. The one topic of conversation in this city today has been the reported appearance of an airship over the eastern portion of Sacramento last night. This mysterious airship was described thus. The body of the craft was oblong and egg-shaped, with fan-like wheels on either side, whose rapid revolutions, beating the air, served to propel the vessel directly against the wind, and in doing so caused the vessel to sway from side to side with a wavering motion, similar to that of a boat being forced against the rapid current of a stream. Midway of the vessel, and suspended directly beneath it, was a brilliant searchlight, about twice the size of an arc light, evidently so placed that the occupants could ascertain when the vessel approached too near the earth and was in danger of collision with lofty objects. Above the egg-shaped body towered a tall, indistinguishable mass, whose shape it was impossible to ascertain. One witness claimed he could see 4 men who were seemingly engaged in propelling the vessel by its fan-like wheels, much after the fashion of a bicyclist driving his wheel over a boulevard. A bystander apparently shouted up to the men and asked where they were going, and was told San Francisco by midnight. Many witnesses saw the searchlight rather than the airship itself, and many mentioned singing, although one stated the singing sounded as if it were coming from a phonograph. They did see its brilliant searchlight travelling over the city, and who swear that they heard the voices of its occupants and distinguished their merry song and laughter. Then there were others who declare that these aerial travellers used the English language, and that they plainly distinguished the words used and commands uttered for the guidance and care of the air vessel. These sightings continued on until late December, at which point they trailed off, and the night skies over California became, once again, the domain of clouds and stars. The phantom airship had, apparently, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Robert E. Bartholomew has written a great deal about the airship mystery as an instance of mass hysteria. He has argued that the concept of the airship had been implanted into the public consciousness through popular literature, for example, by Jules Verne. It was also expected. The newspapers were full of stories of technological advancement and attempts at controlled flight. And wise he must have been to do more than ever a genius did before, accepting Daedalus of yore and his son Icarus, who wore upon their backs those wings of wax he had read of in old almanacs. Darius was clearly of the opinion that the air is also man's dominion, and that with paddle or fin or pinion we soon or late shall navigate the azure as we now sail the sea. The anticipation was there, and Bartholomew points out that many of the descriptions of the airship were similar to the descriptions of actual recorded attempts at flight, which we shall come to shortly. The dismissal of mass witnessed phenomena as mass hysteria is rather common these days, and whilst it might strike us as narrow-minded, it should be noted there have been mainstream examples of mass hysteria. We can think of a few modern examples. One that springs confidently to mind is a certain type of derangement syndrome of the political variety, which leaves non-Americans such as myself rather bemused. There are just as many historical precedents for mass hysteria: the South Sea Bubble, the witch trials, tulip fever, to name but a few. In Memoirs of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay, the author states, "We find that whole communities suddenly fix their minds upon one object and go mad in its pursuit, that millions of people become simultaneously impressed with one delusion and run after it, till their attention is caught by some new folly more captivating than the first. We see one nation suddenly seized from its highest to its lowest members with a fierce desire of military glory, another as suddenly becoming crazed upon a religious scruple, yet neither of them recovering its senses until it has shed rivers of blood and sowed a harvest of groans and tears to be reaped by its posterity." Mackay tells of an odd word that was taken up by the Londoners of his time. It became a strange fashion to say quaz. It was a word without meaning, or rather every meaning, as those who thought themselves in the know would laugh. When a mischievous urchin wished to annoy a passenger and create mirth for his comrades, he looked him in the face and cried quaz, and the exclamation never failed in its object. We might argue that human beings are quintessentially insane, with only the pretense of rationality. Peter the Great put a tax on beards. The justice systems of many countries tried and convicted women for being witches. In my own country, there was once a tax on windows. It is the reason you see so many blocked up windows on older buildings in Great Britain. And despite the strangeness of all this, the people went along with it. In the case of our phantom airship, though, we ought to note that many people in many different parts of the United States saw something moving in the night sky above them. Of course, we might expect mass hysteria to move quickly and widely across a country with near instantaneous communications via electric telegraph. But at what point do we stop and say this is real? Mass hysteria threatens to become the catch-all diagnosis for anything inexplicable that is experienced by many, and so much that might prove valuable may be dismissed. We should be cautious. We should also remember that the technological leap required to build and operate an airship in 1896 was not as great as we might suppose, as we will shortly see. Perhaps the 1896 sightings would have been the end of it. Just one of those odd things that could only happen in California. But then the phantom airship made a reappearance. Not in California, but in the Midwest, beginning in Nebraska. It was now February of 1897, and the second spate of sightings had begun. First Hastings, and then a few days later it appeared over Inner Vale, where it was described as being a canonical-shaped monster about 40 feet in length with 2 sets of wings on each side and a large fan-shaped rudder. The mysterious airship migrated into the skies over South Omaha and toured southeastern Nebraska for a while. 100 people saw it over Wymore, where it dazzled residents with its bright light and circled the town, appearing at one point to be about to land, before thinking better of it and soaring up into the sky again. Kansas was next, and in late March the people of Topeka watched as a blood-red light came out of the west, passed by, and headed out towards the northeast. Some 200 people watched it from the steps of the state capitol, including the state governor, who quipped, "I don't know what that thing is, but I hope it may yet solve the railroad problem." At Belleville, it paused for about 30 minutes before heading north, against the wind. It then appeared over that half of Kansas City that is, rather confusingly, in Missouri. In the town of Everest, back in Kansas, the airship was seen as, according to the Chicago Record, it neared the Earth, or, with the velocity of an eagle, darted upward and sailed away into space until its light merely twinkled, then, reversing itself, came sailing back over the heads of the astonished spectators. It was described as having a car 30 feet in length and shaped like a canoe, and 4 light wings extended from the car, 2 on either side, and immediately above a large mass was discernible, believed by the watcher to have been an inflated gas bag. It returned to Omaha, where it was described as being 90 feet long and elliptical, with what seemed to be wings fore and aft and a brilliant searchlight fitted to the front with a red light fitted to the back. Someone was reading their highway code. A farmer near Peru, Nebraska, claimed to have stumbled across the airship landed and, engaging the crew in conversation, he was told the searchlight had malfunctioned and they did not dare go on in the darkness. The farmer, Mr. James Southard, said the airship was 200 feet long and 50 feet wide, cigar-shaped, and at the back end there was a steel, snail-shaped device which the gasoline engines revolved quickly to propel the craft. The airship was carrying explosives for use against cities in Cuba, according to Southard's account, there being much tension between the United States and Spain in the run-up to the Spanish-American War. On the same night, the airship appeared over Wilsonville, where it amazed and terrified the residents. Their description included 2 pairs of wings, 2 forward, 2 aft, which adjusted alternately, and a windmill-like structure astern moved the ship forward, which sounds remarkably like Southard's description. It was sighted in Iowa, and then South Dakota, and then Missouri, where it supposedly stopped at Marysville. A number of its crew was said to have made repairs using a hammer whilst muttering a few Scandinavian oaths. Reportedly, this is not the airship's only landing, for it is supposed to have made a brief call in Illinois. It was also seen in Wisconsin, where a Dr. J.P. Valby of Rice Lake was summoned to treat its captain. He was promptly enlisted as a passenger using the old rifle pointed at chest method. But as the airship took off, he jumped into an icy lake. The contrast in some of the descriptions and the airship's ability to move around so rapidly suggests there was more than one airship. Or perhaps it was just airship fever. Certainly, the newspapers enjoyed the comedy value it presented. Many attributed the sightings to alcohol and hoaxes, and there do seem to have been a number of tricksters who raided their local stores for kites, candles and gear so to perpetrate their jokes on a credulous public. Many supposed sightings, for example in Lansing, Michigan, turned out to be pranks using lanterns and toy balloons. The reports of the airship became rather silly. A well-known criminal was spotted inside the airship when it passed over Harrison, Nebraska. The airship's crew apparently helped themselves to water from a standpipe in Norfolk, Nebraska, without actually landing. And the Lincoln Evening Post reported receiving a letter dropped from the airship from a Mr. J.F. Califer. The view below me looks sublime. I can conceive of no sensation so strange as mine. The peril and novelty of such an adventure as this. In the length of time I have been afloat, about 42 days, I have lived seemingly a whole century of ordinary life. Nor would I forego this rapturous delight for that of a whole century of ordinary existence. I experience at times considerable discomfort with the cold and dampness, but do not find any difficulty in breathing at the high latitudes, with the exception of a slight constriction of the chest. I have not slept much since the commencement of this trip, but take short naps of 5 or 10 minutes duration. I do not approach the earth except during the night time. Sometimes the people seem to catch sight of the ship when I drift near the earth. I wonder what they think it is. Do they realize it is the Pegasus, the first to navigate space? The newspapers of the early years were not the bastions of truth that they are now. After all, the press and the media of today would never lie to us, now would they? Certainly the tale of Dr. J.P. Valby of Rice Lake later turned out to have been somewhat exaggerated. The Rice Lake Chronicle reported he had simply fallen into the lake whilst taking a shortcut across frozen logs on his way home. William Randolph Hearst called the airship reports yellow journalism. And let's face it, if anyone knew about yellow journalism, it was William Randolph Hearst. In 1897, the armoured cruiser USS Maine was only a year away from suffering the internal explosion that would tip the United States and Spain into war and bring about the end of the Spanish Empire. Hearst would be one of the newspaper magnates who stoked the Americans' fury against Spain. The spate of airship sightings began to wane after mid-April. During the Phantom airship's sojourn over Battle Creek, Michigan, it was reported that a wheel, 3 feet in diameter, fell off the airship as it swooped over the farm of George Parks. It would be interesting to know if the wheel is still there. But now the reports of airships began to appear further afield. An airship was said to have crashed in Aurora, Texas, leaving burnt bodies of a nature out of this world. Another mysterious airship was supposedly seen flying over New York at the end of April, moving in the direction of the North Atlantic. But by the 13th of May, the sightings had come to an end. Curiously, when the 1896-97 complex stopped, for all practical purposes it stopped cold. Various sightings continued to be recorded through the years, but this particular phenomenon reached a dead end at the shores of the Atlantic. The public turned their attention to other matters, and the Phantom airship of 1897 was forgotten, for the most part at least. The world was not unfamiliar with the dirigible in 1896. Australian William Bland had conceived of his atmotic airship in the mid-19th century, whilst Frenchman Henri Giffard had built a steam-powered dirigible and flown it as early as 1852. Mickey Clark Dyer had come up with an airship which utilized paddle wheels and wings as early as the 1870s, and supposedly made a series of successful trial flights. His description sounds strangely familiar. The airship La France made the first entirely controllable free flight in 1884, using a battery-powered electric motor. Alberto Santos Dumont, a wealthy Brazilian living in Paris, worked on a series of dirigibles, and succeeded in using an internal combustion engine to fly his airship over Paris, even against the wind. So, far from being science fiction, the concept of a usable dirigible aerostat being very much within reach was a realistic prospect by the end of the 19th century. Is it possible, therefore, that some secretive American inventor had built just such an airship? Our Phantom airship only seemed to appear during the night, which suggests that someone felt the need to keep it a secret. not only from competitors in the aeronautical fraternity, but also to preserve his rights. To quote the San Francisco Call, "The opinion of the masses is, however, that some tricky inventor, having solved the mystery of aerial navigation, is, with his companions, testing his invention in secret, with no intent of allowing a curious public to view it until his rights are fully protected by letters patent." Two Californian lawyers, an Alameda attorney, George D. Collins, and then a retired district attorney, William Hart, both claimed to know and represent the airship's inventor. They kept his identity a secret, although the name Dr. Benjamin was raised by the Californian press. Both lawyers later went quiet about the matter, but the idea that there was a legal aspect to the phantom airship story so early on is intriguing. Other intriguing aspects include the reports concerning the airship's takeoff and landing sites. The residents of Haywoods believed the airship originated from the canyons of the Palomares Valley. Another witness said he saw the airship rise from a canyon near his place Thursday evening about 7 o'clock and proceed in the direction of San Francisco, and also saw it return. He thought it was stored near Lone Tree Cemetery. Yet another witness, Thomas Jordan of San Rafael, claimed that he found a workshop in a mountain fastness some months ago, that 6 men were working on an airship and that it would soon be completed. The theory that the phantom airship was real and being kept secret is supported by at least 2 modern authors, Michael Busby and J. Allen Danelick, in their respective books Solving the 1897 Airship Mystery, 2004, and The Great Airship of 1897, 2009. Busby theorizes there was more than one airship, and that one crashed in Aurora, Texas, another crashed in the Gulf of Mexico, and a third crashed in the sea off New York. Whether it was only one or more than one, we can only speculate that it must have suffered a catastrophic failure and crashed, possibly into the sea, taking its inventor with it. If those operating it and funding it had effectively gone down with the ship, then the historical silence would make sense. Are the remains still there, under the New York silt, awaiting discovery? It might be interesting to seek through the records and learn if an engineer of note or a wealthy man eccentric enough to fund such an extraordinary project had disappeared in 1897. So, what did happen in the last months of 1896 and the winter and spring months of 1897? What are we to make of it? Was it a case of mass hysteria? Was it a hoax fueled by yellow journalism? Or did someone secretly succeed in flying a dirigible across much of the contiguous US, only to end in disaster? The answer to this mystery might be that all 3 theories are correct. Let's imagine that a maverick engineer convinced a wealthy entrepreneur to back his project, and that this project, created at a time in which there was a realistic momentum behind powered flight, produced a workable airship. They test it in secret, under the cover of darkness, first over California, and then later over the Midwest. Witnesses spot the mysterious craft and the newspapers take up the story. As the days and weeks go by, the airship test flights inspire a number of hoaxes and pranks, and, fueled by newspapers, the test flights light up the public imagination to such an extent that it sparks mass hysteria. Suddenly everyone is seeing airships, left, right and centre. Alcohol and the misidentification of Venus and certain stars play a part. But then, in late April or early May of 1897, disaster strikes, and the airship crashes, killing all those involved. And the prize of powered flight slips out of the inventor's hands, and the accomplishment falls into the realm of urban legend.